Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about how the Khmer just got ridiculously strong in Age of Empires and nobody seems to be paying attention as to why. Nobody even seems to be realizing that Khmer has just gotten a bunch of indirect buffs and that the Civ is absolute bonkers at the moment. Unless of course you've been following some of my videos and you've seen the insane late game Scorps, you might have an idea or two as to how strong the Khmer can be. However, there's more to their buff than just the Scorpions being affected by Ballistics. It's actually quite interesting how much a few small changes can make for a civilization, especially when those small changes don't even affect that civilization directly. Let's go ahead and break down the buffs that the Khmer got and why I think the civilization is absolutely insane right now. Now, the first thing to make note of here is that the Khmer have always been a strong civ, at least in recent times after they got their nice farming bonus, where now their farms don't need to drop off at a mill or a town center. It just sends the food straight into your stockpile as if you had a bunch of food relics. They got this buff years ago and the Khmer have been extremely solid ever since because their farming is just incredible now, and it combines really nicely with their other bonuses, not needing a barracks for example to get straight into a scout rush, making them just overall a smooth and solid civ to play. However, past that and more recently, they got 3 indirect buffs that I want to bring to your attention, and they have varying degrees of relevancy, but all of them will affect the civ to some extent. Now, the first one and the least impactful is that elephants are now harder to convert. This applies only to their battle elephants, making their battle elephants harder to convert by +2 seconds of minimum and +2 seconds of maximum conversion time, making them a little less susceptible to monks, especially in that early castle age. But this definitely has a play in late game as well, especially when combined with devotion and faith. This indirect buff obviously affected other elephant civilizations, but because Khmer have probably some of the best battle elephants in the game and also the fastest, this kind of just makes their battle elephants very strong against monks because you're able to run very quickly towards monks, and if your opponent doesn't have some kind of buffer or meat shield, he can risk losing his monks if he's not converting as soon as you step within line of sight. So the Khmer elephants are actually very good against monks, especially in that late game where there's a bunch of units on the field and your elephants can just charge in with faith and just target the enemy monks themselves. You might not even need Hussar anymore, just faith elephants might be enough to just overrun a few monks and you don't have to worry about getting mass converted anymore. Of course, since you lack heresy as Khmer, you're always at somewhat of a risk at getting converted, but now it's just a little bit harder to do so, making their elephants a more viable option in both 1v1s and team games. The second change that is, in my opinion, the second most relevant and impactful buff is actually the Ballistic Scorpions and the Ballistic Ballista Elephants. Now, this might seem like a bit of a shock because you'd imagine that this is the strongest buff that the Civ might have gotten, and while I could see the argument for it, especially in the late game scenarios, there's one other change on the list that is more impactful when we get to it later. But for now, when it comes to the Ballistic Scorpions and the Ballistic Ballista Elephants, which is hard to say, those two units just got a massive buff. So Scorpions usually were very weak against cavalry because you're able to run around the Scorpions, dodge all of their shots, and then just kind of swarm them, making Scorpions quite ineffective. And so players got creative. They went Scorpions and then maybe some Halberdier or some Hussar to be able to thwart away some cavalry pressure and let the Scorpions do big damage from the back. Now though, you don't even need a meat shield that thieves for Scorpions because they are absolutely melting cavalry with a really high attack of 16 +1 from chemistry and the double shot from the Khmer unique tech, as well as the extra range that Khmer get. So a 9 range, 17 attack, 60 HP unit is what the Khmer backline is looking like right now, and that unit now gets affected by ballistics, so the Hussars or the enemy cavalry no longer have an easy route to deal with these Scorpions. You can't just run off to the side and kind of bait their shots and then swarm them from both sides and kind of flank the Scorpions. No matter how you move with your cavalry now, you will be eating these shots from the Scorpions because now they can track moving targets. It's such an insane buff for the Scorpions, making them so hard to deal with, and I already have a few gameplay videos on my channel about Khmer Scorpions, and you can see for yourself just how insane this unit is. I'm not exaggerating when I say it might be one of the best backline units right now in the entire game, and it's much more realistic to get into Khmer Scorp than say their counters like Siege Onagers. Bombard Cannon's probably the only reasonable counter to the Scorpions, and if a Civ does not have Bombard Cannon, I don't know if they have a counter to Scorpion. At most, they have a unit that can deal with it, or they have to adapt the playstyle to raid on the sides with like some siege ram, or just like raid on the side with a bunch of trebs and try to snipe castles and raid. But even that, the Khmer raiding and the Khmer late game with Hussars can basically match any raiding Civ in the late game because your farms are so fast and you have fully upgraded Hussar. So really, Khmer don't really have many weaknesses against Civs that are lacking Bombard Cannons. If the Civ does have Bombard Cannons, then they do have an easy option to counter Scorpions with, but with the 60 HP Scorpions, now, it does take 2 bomber cannon shots to deal with them. So I would even say in this scenario, it's still playable. You can still go ballistic scorpions, no problem. But this brings me to an even better option. If the opposing civ has bombard cannon, but they lack siege onager, you can just go for the ballista elephant, which has such high HP that the bombard cannons don't do that much damage to, comparing to how much HP it has. So the ballista elephant becomes a very good backline unit against civs that have bombard cannon. And guess what? This unit also benefits from ballistics now. So no matter how you slice it, if their opponent has, siege onagers, you just go heavy scorpions, which come up faster and can, outrange siege onagers unless they have siege engineers. And if they have, no siege onager, but they have bombard cannon, you can just go for ballista elephants. So in either scenario, you have a solid backline option now, and this is completely new for the Khmer. Beforehand, your backline options were always going to be awkward because you have heavy CA and Arbalest that have decent upgrades but lack thumb ring, so they're not going to be perfect. And then you had heavy scorpion and elite ballista elephant, but those guys were lacking ballistics, so those guys were a bit awkward as well. Now ballista elephants and scorpions are the best backline units, and the Khmer games are really just picking between one or the other. Of course, you can still go Arbalest, you can still go for heavy CA, but now your main options just got way stronger. The only reason this change is not that impactful is because those two options are still late game options. However, scorpions do come into play in Castle Age, and ballistic scorpions in Castle Age with an extra range are quite the threat, and definitely worth investing into if you can. And it can thwart, all kinds of archer pressure. It can be a really good way to pressure against archer civs as well. It can, easily deal with cav archers. It's a very good unit in Castle Age. But ballista elephant, usually with its high cost, is only reserved for an Imperial Age unit, which is why the Khmer doesn't really get like a massive buff with this change, because you don't always get to these units. This brings me to the third indirect buff, which applies every single game with the Khmer and gives them a competitive edge against most civilizations in the game. And you won't understand it at first until I explain it, especially if you're not an experienced player, because it's a bit weird how it would work, but once I explain it, it'll make perfect sense. So it has to do with the market change. So if you guys aren't familiar with what happened, the market change that came in recently basically made it so instead of buying food with 130 gold as a base cost, it now costs 150 gold to buy 100 food at the market. This makes it so mining gold and then buying food is less worth it than it was beforehand. And in general, before this change, mining gold and then buying food at the market was considered a very good thing to do, because mining gold is very quick. You don't need to make farms for it, and then you can just transform it all to, food at the market at a reasonable price of 130 gold for 100 food. As we all know, the market does give worse and worse prices the more you use it, but if you just need to buy 300 or 400 food, you can get away with just a few hundred gold and you'll be fine. Now, you basically need to pay an extra 20 gold per 100 food, and this really hurts this kind of approach, because now you need an extra 20 resources times the amount of 100 food you need to get up to the Castle Age at a good time, making it so mining gold and buying food is that much less effective. And when it comes to this approach, it's already very weak the more you use it. And so the idea was, before, you'd use it a little bit, get a strong Castle Age power spike, and then move on to a proper economy. Whereas now it's really hard to afford that few hundred food to get a faster Castle Age, because you need basically another like 80 or 100 gold to be able to afford it. And on top of that, once you do get the Castle Age, you can't touch that market again. The prices are going to be at something like 165 gold for 100 food, which is very not worth it. And so basically the practical effect of this market change is that it favors civilizations that don't rely on buying food from the market. So civilizations such as Ethiopians that like to get a lot of gold and then, get up fast, use that timing attack to get an extra 100 food, 100 gold in Castle Age and put pressure. Those civs got weaker. Crossbow civs in general got weaker because they can no longer rely on the market to the same capacity that they were relying on it beforehand. And what civs got stronger? The civs that got stronger are the civs that have good farming, and Khmer just happened to be one of the best farming civs in the game. Of course, other civilizations like Slavs get a really nice buff. Romans, you could argue maybe a little bit, but Khmer is probably the civilization that gets the biggest buff, because now you don't need buildings to click up to the Castle Age, so you can just skip market altogether. You might not even go for a blacksmith. You can just go like literally stable, get a few scouts that wall up, and then you can turbo your way to Castle Age. Alternatively, you can play a bigger feudal age by going double stable, going blacksmith, getting upgrades, putting so much pressure, and then not have to worry about your opponent getting to Castle Age as fast as they were able to before using the market. And behind this, the Khmer farms will be one of the best farms in the game in feudal age, giving you a ton of food to work with, and you never need to buy food at the market. Quite the contrary, with the Khmer, you can actually sell food at the market for a higher price than what you'd get beforehand. Before, you'd sell 100 food for 70 gold as the base cost. Now you sell 100 food food for 80 gold. So Khmer that stack up on food very easily, you can now sell that food for a better price at the market. This might not seem like it's a very big deal, but when you consider that at the highest level, 1 minute faster castle age can really make or break a game because of that castle age power spike being so good. Now the Khmer are much quicker to get the castle age compared to these other civs, and even if you get the castle age slower, your economy will be so much better since you don't have to rely on the market. Khmer have always been a civilization that do not die to timing attacks because you can easily just defend with some houses, garrison and houses, wait for ballistic scorpions to come out, and in general you're just a good early game civ anyways, so you're usually not dying to those strats. But nowadays it's basically impossible to die to those strats just because of how much they got nerfed and how much Khmer are better now in comparison. So overall, I would say with these 3 indirect buffs, Khmer have basically fixed their entire game. They have stronger elephants that are more viable and much more, easy to use. They have ballistic scorpions and ballista elephants that fixes their entire late game problem, which was a little bit awkward because they had, Hussar that was very obvious, but then they were lacking a solid backline. Now you have that solid backline. In team games, you always went for ballista elephants or battle elephants. Now those are just, perfectly better. Scorpions are also more solid in team games, although, you have to watch out for enemy mass bomber cannons. But if they don't have them, then Scorps are definitely solid. And then in 1v1s, you no longer have to worry about your opponent getting a timing advantage using the market. You can just play a solid, clean farming, strong build loader game with Khmer and just be stronger than other civs that usually rely on the market. And you have a solid late game to build up into in the 1v1s as well. In conclusion, I think the civ is absolutely insane right now, and I highly recommend you guys use it. It's also not a very popular civ, so you shouldn't run into many mirror matches, and it won't be like a Khmer vs Khmer fest. Unless everyone listens to this video, but I highly doubt I have that kind of influence. So if you're watching this video and you're one of the lucky ones that wants to take the advice, try out the Khmer and see how good they are for yourselves. And as one last special tip in the end of the video, for those who are eager to watch all of the video and not miss a single second of it, I recommend the Khmer scouts into archers play. The archers cover your weakness of not needing a barracks in 1v1s. So if your opponent masses spears, you just go scouts, put pressure, force the spears, switch into double range archers, and then you continue making scouts because you're gonna have such a good farming setup. So with scouts and double range archers, that makes for the strongest feudal age pressure you can go for, and you can end games very easily with Khmer and feudal age this way. Just play aggressive, put pressure, and break your opponent's houses, not walls, because houses have -1 melee armor in feudal age, so you can easily break through those and deal massive damage. And then behind it, you can just stop production of scouts whenever and just go up to castle age, and you're going to be golden to go crossbow knights and whatever, even like ballistic scorpions, whatever comes to mind. And that's basically what I'd recommend with Khmer at the moment. But that's going to be it for the video. Hope you guys did enjoy it. If you guys want more content and secret tips from me, do check out my Patreon. All of my exclusive guides and content are there. Link in the description. Also, you can check out my live stream. Link also in the description on Twitch. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and peace out.